Hello and welcome to this episode of the World Deciphered, brought to you by the Cipher Brief. I'm your host, Suzanne Kelly. It's really great to have you with us this week. Well, Chinese artificial intelligence startup DeepSeek's announcement that its AI model, known as DeepSeek R1, rivaled that of ChatGPT at a fraction of the cost, caused the U.S. tech market to plunge, with U.S. President Donald Trump describing it as a wake-up call for U.S. companies. Since the world has now had a moment to take a closer look at R1, another narrative is taking hold, one of opportunity. In this episode of The World Deciphered, we're talking with Chip Usher, Senior Director for Intelligence at the Eric Schmidt-backed Special Competitive Studies Project, and Gilman Louie, a regular advisor to the U.S. government and co-founder and managing partner at America's Frontier Fund, about what we now know about DeepSeek and how announcements like this are impacting U.S. national security. Before we get started, though, it's been a tumultuous week for the U.S. government as the Trump administration begins implementing many of its priorities. Let's check in now with Cipher Brief Managing Editor Tom Nagorski for a look at other stories making headlines this week at thecipherbrief.com. Hey, Tom.
Suzanne, almost all our focus this week is on statements or actions coming from the new Trump administration, and we'll start with a big one. A blockbuster statement about Gaza, which the president made late Tuesday. It was actually several statements. He said the U.S. plans to take over Gaza, carry out a major rebuilding effort there, and that Arab countries in the region would take in the nearly 2 million Palestinians who live in the devastated territory. And to call that an out-of-the-box idea is understatement. There's been a whole set of reactions. Some officials in the region and elsewhere have noted that such a takeover would probably be illegal, as would the driving out by force of Gaza's population. It may also be unfeasible because key players here, Egypt, Jordan, and the Arab Gulf states, are adamantly opposed to the whole notion. And others have raised the danger that this may play into the hands of the Islamic State and other militant groups, which might seize on the fact that an American president plans to take over Palestinian land as a tool to recruit new terrorists. President Trump's argument seems to be that nothing else has worked for Gaza for a very long time, and sounding like the real estate mogul that he is, or was, talking about the Gaza Strip as a great opportunity for investment and for riverfront property. No idea whether this is headed anywhere, but certainly it's the story of the moment. And there is other news at the nexus of the new administration and national security involving two of the bedrock institutions in the intelligence community. The Trump administration has fired 24 senior prosecutors at the FBI and asked for more than 2,000 FBI field agents who were tied to the January 6th investigations to fill out questionnaires. The concern there is that cuts in the Bureau could impact domestic intelligence and law enforcement. And then came word that the CIA is offering buyouts to nearly its entire workforce. All of this a part of the overhaul of the intelligence community that Trump had promised. This raises an obvious question about the ability of the agency to do its work if a large number of CIA officers and managers accept the buyout. And if all this weren't enough, Suzanne, we have special reports on the site at thecipherbrief.com on the Chinese military, China's DeepSeek AI breakthrough, and what a weakened Iran may mean for the future of its nuclear program. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Let's get right to it now. News that DeepSeek had created an AI model that could rival OpenAI's ChatGPT for a fraction of the cost sent shockwaves around the world. But what do we now know about how it started and whether those initial claims were accurate? I asked Chip Usher, Senior Director with the Eric Schmidt-backed Special Competitive Studies Project, to help us unpack R1 and to explain just what this announcement means on a broader scale.
And it is confusing because there are claims and counterclaims as to what DeepSeek actually did and its significance. So let me see if I can kind of walk through it in layman's terms so that we can all kind of talk about it in a similar way. What occurred, really going back to around Christmas time, is this Chinese AI lab called DeepSeek revealed and published papers about 3 models that it had created. The first was called V3, and the most recent one is called R1. And the significance is that in the case of R1, which is the latest one that they released earlier this month, its performance is comparable to OpenAI's most recent model, O1. these version names often sound similar, and they kind of come fast and furious because they keep releasing new versions of them. But the DeepSeek model is comparable in performance to OpenAI's, and it exceeds the performance of Llama, which is another U.S. company, Meta's AI model. And that, in and of itself, is significant. But on top of that, it's how they went about it. The way that they created their model was faster and cheaper and used less compute than what American companies have done. And that is what has the markets riled up. It's what has policymakers in Washington and around the world looking at this very seriously, because as we have read over the last year or plus, as we've been watching OpenAI and Meta and Anthropic release their models and creating more and more of these data centers to build and train their models with. We're hearing figures of hundreds of billions of dollars, right? These frontier models are consuming vast amounts of electricity, and they consume vast numbers of NVIDIA's most advanced GPU chips. And in the case of DeepSeek, what they managed to accomplish with V3, which they announced around Christmas time, is they trained it in just 2 months. And they trained it on GPUs that are known as H800s. These are NVIDIA chips that were exported legally to China in the wake of the October 2022 export ban announced by the Biden administration. That ban really targeted what are the most advanced chips that NVIDIA makes, the H100s, but it didn't preclude the sale of H800s. And so it's very interesting that this Chinese company was able to squeeze an enormous amount of performance out of inferior chips and fewer of them. To give you a comparison, the published reports I've seen indicate that they used about 50,000 H800 chips. The more recent OpenAI efforts, they're talking about 500,000 H100 chips, right? So a vast difference in compute power.
Wow.
So they were able to do this in significantly less time because they put together some techniques that AI labs have been developing and are using, but in some novel and unique ways. And so how they do it was sort of interesting. The first thing that they did is they used a technique called mixture of experts, MOE. And what does that mean? Let me see if I can explain it in terms that a layman can understand.
Yeah.
Think about a company like General Electric. General Electric makes all sorts of things: dishwashers, aircraft engines, radars, right? So if you're an outsider going to GE and you knock on the door and the receptionist greets you, imagine if every time there was a query, whether it's I need to buy a jet engine or I need to sell you paper clips, that decision went through the entire GE infrastructure before an answer was delivered. That's sort of roughly analogous way as to how OpenAI and some of our closed model systems operate, kind of brute computing power. This other technique, which is not unknown to American companies, but what DeepSeek really seems to have perfected here, is called mixture of experts. So when you walk into that reception room at GE and you say, I want to buy a jet engine, it immediately directs you to that expert, the expert that's going to deliver you the jet engine that you require. And again, our companies have been developing techniques to do this, but it seems that DeepSeek kind of really refined that process. It speeds up the response and it reduces the amount of compute and energy that's required to deliver an answer. Yeah. That's one method that they used. The other is it's called reinforcement learning. And again, your typical AI model that we are kind of used to playing with, the ChatGPT and O1 and Sonnet 3.5. They are trained using reinforcement learning, but it's sort of akin to how you would train your pet dog, right? You ask it to do a trick. When it performs that trick, you give it a reward. And that early approach of kind of blunt reinforcement learning was very effective, and in fact was the underpinnings of what DeepMind accomplished when it beat the best Go player several years back, right? AlphaGo was a reinforcement learning approach. In the time since AlphaGo, there are new techniques where not just providing a reward and eventually your pet dog is going to learn how to do the trick, but offer rewards, but then offer which experts might be useful to iterate to get the better response. And it's proven to be a little bit more of an efficient and faster way to generate learning and training for an AI model. So that's another approach that they used. And it would appear there have been accusations by OpenAI, backed up by Microsoft, in the days since DeepSeek made its announcement, that they may have, in fact, used OpenAI R1 to train their model. It's a process called distillation. And in fact, our companies use it all the time when they release a model, but then they release a kind of smaller follow-on model that's cheaper, but it's consumer-facing. They often train that model from their bigger, larger model. And it appears that DeepSeek may have done that in this instance, which got their model kind of up to speed quicker. So in a way, they're kind of free riding on the work that OpenAI and others may have pioneered. So, this is not to denigrate the accomplishment, but it does suggest that, the amount of compute that DeepSeek and other Chinese companies will have available to them in the future will still matter. They did this with H100s. Imagine what they could have accomplished if they had H100s.
Yeah,
right.
It's pretty fascinating if you think about it. Let me ask you. Any company that comes along and can produce something at a certain level of quality faster and cheaper is a wake-up call in the market. And the market certainly felt that initially, and they've rebounded a little bit since that initial shock. But when it comes to the other things that are being learned about DeepSeek and learned from DeepSeek, one thing that I'm really focused on is the innovation, like the level of innovation that would have been required for them to do something like this. And you don't traditionally think of the PRC. I, as a layman, think of them as being extremely competent, but not necessarily as innovative as something like this. That was a bit of a wake-up call for me. Should that also be a wake-up call for national security professionals here?
Absolutely. And that, in fact, is sort of the main thesis of my organization, the Special Competitive Studies Project, that we have entered a period of intensified innovation competition, primarily between the United States and the People's Republic of China, but not those two actors alone. But this is emblematic of the sort of thing that we're going to face more and more frequently in the years ahead. And it's not the first time. I mean, we don't have to go that far back to other recent examples of Chinese breakthroughs that sort of shocked the marketplace and shocked the national security community. Think back to 2023 when Huawei released their Mate 60 Pro smartphone, just timed perfectly when our Commerce Secretary was paying a visit to Beijing. And the performance of that smartphone was remarkably good, though it has since proven not to be as good as our best smartphones. But it certainly was a strong showing, and it shocked people. And DeepSeek is similar. I think the upshot is it shows how quickly China can close the gap if a gap exists. And that ought to be concerning to the United States, not just for commercial and competitive reasons, but also for national security reasons.
So what does this mean, do you think, Chip, to the intelligence community in particular?
Well, here at SESP, we have been sounding the alarm that we as an intelligence community need to devote more time and attention and resources to what we have coined techno-economic intelligence. Nothing especially new to the IC. It's been done for years, but it needs more attention and more resources so that policymakers down the line are not caught by surprise by events like this. Now, I'm not privy to the current intelligence reporting, but judging by what we've seen in the open source with regard to the market's reaction, policymakers' reaction, I would hazard a guess that our intelligence community did not identify DeepSeek as on the threshold of a major AI breakthrough. Where we would like to see the IC land here in the not too distant is to do exactly that sort of thing. So it needs to shift how it collects against techno-economic issues like this, who it collects against, and how it goes about analyzing and assessing that data.
That's a tall order. It's easy to criticize, but once you understand the challenges that are associated with getting that kind of information, I think you have a whole lot more respect for the intelligence community. Anything else you want to leave us with as we kind of consider what this means in this particular case, but also the competition between China and the U.S. moving forward when it comes to technology and innovation, like we talked about?
Yeah, just one other point. And DeepSeek, their model is what they call an open source model, which is different from OSINT. This is meaning that their code is openly available and available for others to unpack and understand, unlike OpenAI and Anthropic and some of ours, which are closed source. But this is a real boon to hostile cyber and disinformation actors around the globe. China, Iran, North Korea, these actors are now going to have available to them at very little cost, with very little effort, access to a very capable AI. And they can iterate on that to develop specialized models to conduct cyber and disinformation ops at scale. And it's already happening. I saw a recent report that there are literally dozens of cyber actors inside China that already have been using Google's Gemini AI to write malicious code and to search for network vulnerabilities in foreign countries. Well, now with DeepSeek's model, this capability is going to be diffused even further faster. So that's one implication, is we need to be sort of guard up against AI-enabled cyber and disinformation ops even more than before. And the last point I would make is the accusation that DeepSeek may have learned, benefited from U.S. developed models, kind of brings up the point that we need to be able to defend national security AIs when we create them. We cannot have Chinese users logging on and cheating ahead to train their models based on national security U.S. models. It absolutely raises the importance of defending our systems.
You can watch the full interview with Chip Usher on the Cipher Briefs YouTube channel, where we also have interviews with former Deputy Director of the National Security Agency, Rick Leggett, and former Deputy Director of CIA for Digital Innovation, Jennifer Eubank, on how they see the potential risks and opportunities created by DeepSeek's announcement. We'll be back in just a moment with Gilman Louie, an advisor to U.S. government and co-founder and managing partner of America's Frontier Fund, for his take on the opportunities he sees from the DeepSeek announcement. Back in a minute.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Briefs NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
Gilman Louie is a co-founder and managing partner at America's Frontier Fund. He is also the former CEO of In-Q-Tel, and he's an advisor on national security and technology to the U.S. government. I wanted to know how he's seeing the risk and opportunity associated with the Chinese AI model DeepSeek, and how he believes it will impact U.S. national security.
So the U.S. advantage has always been its technical base and the use of certain tools that we had in national security to restrict flows of technologies overseas, particularly to a place like China. And so in the analysis in the prior administration, the focus was on restriction of capabilities, particularly around microelectronics, right? So on one hand, the U.S. tech companies, 4 to 5 major AI companies, are in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's kind of interesting to point that out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at what took place, it was, okay, we have the chips, they don't, right? We have the latest generations, the B100s, they have the H100, they have limited supplies, and we don't. And we can build our foundational compute capabilities around an abundance of chips. We basically, last week they announced a $500 billion going into new server farms and new capabilities. And that was just one cohort of companies, not all the cohort of companies. So that was seen as our ability to keep the advantage. Now, what's interesting is anybody in engineering knows scarcity creates a different kind of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So to some of us, it wasn't a surprise that another group of talented engineers and scientists could come up with a different cut on the problem to solve a class of compute with far less compute. Not that different than in national security when the US had huge computational advantage, the Soviets had to invest in algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
So they became very good at creating algorithms because they didn't have access to compute, right? Fast forward 60, 70 years later, same thing just happened in China.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so want to point that out is so like if we had a different environment where they didn't have the scarcity, they might not have gotten to that solution.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have abundance, there is no incentive to solve for scarcity. Now,
That's a really interesting take on that. So the scarcity of the materials they needed to launch this is really driving more innovation on behalf of China. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, particularly on things like algorithms and mathematical approaches to go off and solve these classes of problems.
Yeah.
Now, the reality, as people have unpacked this thing, is that the current implementation of DeepSeek, at least from an algorithmic point of view, is a momentary advantage. Any great engineer, all they need to know is if she can look across the way and say, you may not show me your trick, but I know it is now a solvable problem. We have smart people who will solve that problem. And you combine that with open source. It means that that performance gap of what I can do with far less computing, right, will level itself off.
Mm-hmm.
Now the market's panicked because it's, oh my God, we don't need as many NVIDIA chips,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like dump
right.
NVIDIA, right? We don't need all these server farms, and let's go in the opposite direction.
And some
But
people did.
But in the history of compute, whenever there's been a computational breakthrough in performance or price,
Mm-hmm.
name a moment in history where that resulted in less compute.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
demand for compute will go up because of this, because what this will result in is accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
So in the old world, if you weren't, one of the big 5 AI companies, right, it was very, very difficult to see yourself competing on world-class applications if you didn't have billions of dollars of investment to compete against them.
Yeah.
DeepSeek has shown that you don't need that. So you got to, it's kind of funny, it's coming from China. In some ways, you're getting a democratization of AI innovation because of this new price performance breakthrough. And it's coming from China, it's not coming from the US. To the point where the former CEO of Intel, Pat Gelsinger, announced in his new AI startup, he's going to use DeepSeek.
Mm-hmm.
The former CEO of Intel, which enjoyed billions of dollars of investments from CHIPS Act on the argument of national security, now it's going to benefit from using technology built in another country because of scarcity.
Mm-hmm. It's not how you really saw this story going, is it?
Well,
it's fascinating.
The reality is, we are so early in the AI. This is just a blip.
Yeah. I asked you the last time we spoke, Gilman, how we were talking broadly about this tech race between the US and China, particularly when it comes to national security. And I asked you, what are going to be the indicators? How are we going to know? Because everyone wants to talk about, are we winning? Are we behind? Are we winning? Are we behind? And I asked what you're looking at. And the first thing you said was, watch the commercial market. How do you feel about that today?
I think the speed in which AI companies and application companies are growing, right? Like 30 a day, that's going to start
Yeah.
accelerating, right?
Wow.
So now it's a slightly different race. And this is a real dilemma for the United States.
Mhm.
Is the bias is going to be a bias for action. So prior to kind of this recent set of breakthroughs, everybody was worried about AI security, AI safety, ethical issues around AI. Are we going too fast? Should we slow down? Right? We had petitions that people are saying need to go slower. Right? We need to be more thoughtful. Countries, nation states, right? Whole alliances like the EU, who says, we need to have conferences. The French want to lead this discussion. The U.S., even the Department of Defense, we want to have the discussion. Now, because of accessibility, the there is now definitely a race, and that race means that if you go too slow
Mhm.
using the old models and the old techniques because you're kind of inhibiting innovation, the other team may run right by you,
Mhm.
and you the next time around may not be able to catch them. And so you're going to see a logarithmic increase of AI powered applications around large language models using this new framework that DeepSeek has, whether you use
Mhm.
DeepSeek or somebody has an alternative version of that.
Mhm.
That's an accelerate growth because it's available and it can be everywhere. And that will change how we even think about where AI computes.
Mhm.
Because if you need smaller models and less computation, it means that potentially you can do more computation on the edge, which also
Mhm.
changes the power equation quite a bit if I don't have to go to the cloud.
Yeah, right. That'll be a whole separate conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Let me ask you something else quickly. President Trump ordered the creation of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. That news just recently broke. And, you are the CEO and co-founder, I believe, of In-Q-Tel all those years ago, Gilman, when the CIA realized that it could get into the venture capital market as a way to spur innovative ideas for solutions that would help government with a lot of the problem sets that they had. Also be dual facing. It would have some commercial applications. You came from the commercial sector. So I really wanted to get your thoughts on, sort of how these sovereign wealth funds work in general and kind of what are they created to intend to address. Whether they're able to do it or not is a separate question.
I think on the earlier statement about In-Q-Tel, it's hard to imagine it took place 25 years ago.
Yeah.
It's 25 years ago, and most of the experts, including most of the board members, with people like Bill Perry and Norm Augustine and Michael Crow. By the way, Michael Crow gets more credit because he was actually the first CEO of In-Q-Tel, not me.
I thought you were. You could have gotten away with that.
He hired me, so but he came
Okay.
first, and Michael is still chairman. And it made us think differently about how venture capital can play a role in national security. AFF is a byproduct of that, getting capital from the Office of Strategic Capital from the Department of Defense as a major investor. So that tradition continues. This new announcement, right, is an important one. And it's the realization that globally, sovereign wealth funds, the ability to leverage anywhere from a half a trillion to $2 trillion to invest in innovation, right, is now a new engine that fuels innovation. And
Mhm.
if you look at the US, well, we've been very, very advantaged in the last software revolution. The next technical revolution around frontier technologies is going to require deep tech investing. And
Mhm.
deep tech investing requires a different kind of investment profiles. And you have to have much more patient limited partners. Limited partners are people who invest in venture funds.
Yeah.
Sovereign wealth funds are a method for nation states to support that set of activity. And so the US is at a huge disadvantage when you compare it against the Netherlands or Saudi Arabia or the Chinese or even a country like Singapore, which has more than one, or even Australia with the superannuation funds, right? Venture funds listen to that LP, international LP base, more than they listen to the U.S., simply because the U.S. is not in the game. And if the U.S. is going to win and maintain its innovation advantages, right, it needs to find a method to provide the necessary risk capital to invest in things that allows America to build again, right? Not just innovate, but to actually build. And that entire supply chain of infrastructure requires a different kind of investment. Now, there's two parts of this, right? Difference between a sovereign wealth fund and, an initiative is initiatives are we put money into, right, the public sector or the private sector, and we hope that that would stimulate growth. We put a lot of money through stimulus in the last handful of years. The reality is you're giving money away. There's nothing that comes back. What other nation states have realized is if you use the sovereign wealth fund model and you do it right, you actually have professional managers who know how to manage funds, and you invest in good funds and good projects and programs, they'll have a return on investment. And that return on investment not only pays back the original investment, but it sets the table for future generations. So it is a tool that the U.S. needs to have, and I think the Trump administration rightly identified that this is a different way of allocating resources to fund innovation that ultimately could have a payoff not just in keep the U.S. ahead in the technology race, but actually economic benefits for future generation of Americans if these funds are invested properly.
And that was, that was a lesson also from your Incotel experience, I think, as well, right? Because what you realized is you're making a lot of money, and that was an okay problem to have.
Yes, and in fact, there was a little bit of worry when Incotel was being constructed that we would have catastrophic success. Catastrophic success is that, you do a company and it, has this huge rate of return, and what do you do with it? And Incotel had a great agreement with the Congress and the CI that money gets invested to support innovation, not direct investments. But, you look at Palantir. I did Palantir as one of my last deals when I left Incotel back in the early 2000s. And today, Palantir is worth more than Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, which I think obviously a lot of people didn't see coming at the time, but some did.
Some did.
And they're also seeing a big return.
Yeah.
Gilman, what else top of mind for you as you look forward? To the next couple of weeks, months. We're in a new administration. There's been a lot of very fast change very quickly. What are you looking for?
Well, a few things, right? Let's start with the department. We'll just go to the IC next. Yeah. Look, for us to be able to, as the new Secretary of Defense says that he wants lethality to increase, our ability to project power, right, to be able not just to project it, but actually actuate it if we actually get ourselves into that fight. Given the speed of innovation, particularly the capacity of a country like China, we have to rethink about not only the tools that we use if we get ourselves into a fight, but how we build it. The U.S. has always had, since World War II, a manufacturing advantage over our adversaries. In many cases, take a country like Germany in World War II, in many ways, they were more advanced than we were, but they did not have the capacity to manufacture at the rate necessary to sustain a long fight, and the U.S. did. If we get ourselves into a bad situation with a nation state like China, and hopefully we do not, our ability to sustain is more important than just the shiny tool that we're going to bring, the shiny weapon that we're going to bring into the fight. We're learning that in the Ukraine right now. I think in order for us to do that transformation, it means that there's going to be pain in the department because we have to stop doing programs. We can't continue to spend the rate that we're doing. We're going to be spending close to $1 trillion in this next budget on the Department of Defense. And the question is, with all that money we're spending, well, we have certain strategic and tactical advantages over our competitors, right? Our competitors are quickly catching us, in some areas surpassing us in things like hypersonics. And we need to rethink that equation. I think from an intelligence point of view, I think AI changes everything. Yeah, AI is going to change autonomy in the defense quite a bit and how we think about warfare. But how we understand what other nations' intent is either against the U.S. or understand how they think about the U.S., right? The old model, kind of very sequential of, tasking and collection and processing and dissemination, that model is a very old model, right? That was built for a different time in a different era where we were organized around tools of collection rather than tools of knowledge. And so the IC, if it wants to maintain its relevance in the world, not only needs to do a better job in sensing what's happening around the world, it needs to be able to process it in a way where the information gives us information advantage, decision advantage, by whether it's a warfighter, the President of the United States, a principal, whoever we're supporting in the IC, we need to rethink the equation.
Quick reminder now that you can find a full interview with Gilman Louie on the Cipher Briefs YouTube channel. And that's it for this episode of The World Deciphered. If you're looking for more expert interviews, as well as reporting and analysis through a nonpartisan lens, you can find a lot more at thecipherbrief.com. That's where you'll also find our daily open source report available Monday through Friday that gets you up to speed very quickly on what's happened in the world regarding U.S. and national security. I hope you'll check it out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time right here on The World Deciphered.